Today's theme for the couple of news pieces which I'm covering is a very similar idea, this idea of taking an iconic classic, either modern retro classic or a true classic, and reimagining it with full electric power. And the funny thing is, as you'll see from the two thumbnails today, those can elicit wildly different responses, at least from me, because on this first occasion it's a car which most of the internet will absolutely hate the idea of, and then the second one I actually think is a brilliant idea to make it electrified. We'll get to that one later on though, and let's just say, to give you a bit of a teaser, it's a type of car which I am acutely familiar with, especially lately, so that should give you all the clue that you need. First up though, we have news of, believe it or not, a group of volunteers, apparently, volunteer engineers within Nissan who have developed, in fact they've been developing since March of 2023, an all-electric, as yet we don't really know any actual spec on the car, but you can make some assumptions which we'll get into in a second, an electric Restomod of the R32 Godzilla quote-unquote Skyline GTR, a car which for most people didn't really need to be Restomodded at all. It was already perfectly good as it was, and I even say that as someone who's never really been a huge fan of the R32. I'm more of an R33 or R34 kind of guy, and sometimes I am partial to a nice R31, but of course it is massively iconic and massively successful. The idea of taking even one vehicle, which I would assume was probably in at least half decent condition to begin with, but maybe I'm wrong, that would kind of be a saving grace for this. Maybe it was some trashed or ruined version, but I highly doubt it, which they've turned into this electric vehicle. Of course we all get the idea of why they're doing it. It attracts more attention, they're trying to put a positive spin on it for marketing, blah blah blah, but the reality is it's one of probably the worst ways to go about it if you're trying to appeal to, ironically, exactly what this car is trying to appeal to: petrol heads. You don't make an electric Nissan Skyline if you're trying to just attract the general public to buy a new hybrid Nissan Juke or something like that. This is specifically a car which is for us, the petrolhead crowd, the Gran Turismo crowd, the Need for Speed crowd, the racing crowd, and many of us are very vehemently against electric vehicles in general, let alone taking something like this and turning it into one. Now for me, I'm not as much in that camp as you would probably think, because as I have voiced a number of times on the channel and will continue to, I actually am a fan of electric vehicles, but the key is I think you have to use them in the right circumstance. In fact, I would argue there are three particularly good uses of an electric vehicle, either on a new scale or a Restomod scale. In terms of new vehicles, I think by far the two best choices, at least from what I've seen so far, are either supercars like the Rimac, which are just tremendous machines, or the Aspark Owl, which have already, between the two of them alone, broken multiple records. The second thing, on a more attainable scale, although still expensive, is actually bikes. And I don't mean mountain bikes, I'm talking about motorbikes, stuff like the Harley-Davidson Livewire, Energica Ego or Eva, companies like Zero, which is basically the Tesla of bikes. The idea of having an instant response, all-torque motorcycle is a brilliant idea, and I have reviewed a few of those on the channel, and they are as fun as you'd imagine they would be. The third way, which I think is a good idea, is particularly and very specifically applicable to the second video later on today, and that is the idea of taking a vehicle which was not very good, and then you make it a better machine while keeping its core identity. In the case of an R32, well, even as a non-fan, it just seems like a waste of a car. Now in terms of getting more details of this car's layout and tech, you don't have to wait too long. The January Tokyo Auto Salon is where they're planning to showcase the car in more detail, presumably, but you can make some assumptions. It'll probably still have four-wheel drive, at least a pair of motors of course to achieve that. Performance will be fantastic. I would imagine they would probably be aiming for at least 400 or 500 horsepower, maybe more. I don't know if they have any real kind of plan for production. I would imagine it's basically what I said earlier on, which is just a bit of a gimmick to attract more attention to their future electric vehicles and maybe try and put a bit of a spicy spin on it, essentially what Renault's doing with the new Renault 5 Turbo. So overall, it's exactly as divisive as you would assume a vehicle like this would be, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you a fan of it, or do you think this is sacrilegious to do? For me, like I said, it depends from car to car. It's not like it was a car that was problematic to begin with. It's a legend for a reason, so to me that's why it feels like a bit of a waste. Now, of course, stick around later today for the total opposite of this, a prime example of when I think this is actually a brilliant idea. And of course I'll see you then, but for now, thanks for watching.